We think in this debate, what radical honesty does is it doesn't just improve you as a person, it improves your relationships and your bonds between people. What is our stance in this debate? Three things. First, we think that radical honesty is good on an individual level, aka for you as a person. Second, we think it's good when it's practiced on both sides of a relationship, because if it's completely one-sided, like just with a stranger, then we think that's just kind of uncharitable. And third, we're not saying it's a norm or a standard that everyone follows, just that it's probably a good idea for you to practice this in your relationships. Okay, now 5 points of framing. First, what does radical honesty look like? First, we think it looks like avoiding lying and you're like telling people your most profound and personal feelings and just like being able to share these things that aren't normally shared to the public. Second, we think that radical honesty happens on both sides of the relationship, right? Because we think humans naturally want to reciprocate things. We feel like there are studies that say like we actually feel closer to the person that when we help them rather than we're the person who receives help, right? So we naturally want to do this kind of thing. And you like also we actually just feel bad if it's one-sided, right? If they tell you everything but you're keeping all of these secrets from them, there's a level of guilt there that's going to prevent that from happening. Okay, third, we think this is not likely to be all your relationships, aka not just an acquaintance, not just a stranger, but rather the people who you are most close to, right? So you trust them more and are more willing to like to air these things out, because like obviously you won't want to air your personal grievances out to like some random person you've met yesterday. And fourth and final point, actually, sorry, like not 5 4. You probably aren't actually just going to do this with one person either, right? Because you generally have multiple close bonds. For example, your parents, your friends, your romantic partner, whatever. And so if you're super close, you probably already have a lot of trust in them, and that trust is probably justified. For example, because it's your parents or it's your spouse, right? You have a lot of trust because you've spent that much time and they've had a lot of opportunity to, for example, betray you, but they haven't. And so we think that radical honesty is probably going to happen within your close personal circle and really intimate situations. Are there any like clarifications? I'm gonna assume not. Okay, onto my substantives first. Then, first, like why this trust actually leads to better self-improvement. Like uniquely on our side, you're able to share where we feel the other person is going wrong, aka for example they're dating bad people or their outfit choice is bad or even they're like picking a bad career, right? So if you don't have this radical honesty, we say that people are naturally just kind of people pleasers or just don't feel close enough to you to be able to call those things out. So you aren't made aware of these things, and then there is like less of a safeguard if you make certain mistakes. And we say that you're also likely if you are called out by like for example your best friend, you're also more likely to take this well because you aren't made aware. Sorry, because like this is kind of an established dynamic between you and them. So you know that person has your best interest at heart and actually knows you really well and is probably well equipped to make those judgments about you. That means you won't like brush it off and will actually reflect and think about that decision that you're making. What are the impacts of this? First, there's like now an external kind of like benevolent force watching you and caring for you and making sure you're on the right path, which means you're comforted because someone has your back and there's a level of safeguard just in case like something goes wrong and you make a terrible life decision. Second, you just make kind of less bad decisions in general and behave badly a lot less. So for example, you mistreat people less, you like do rude things or like treat people badly less, because if you're being rude, your friend will see that, right? Because they're spending a lot of time with you and they will call you out. They will tell you, "Hey, that's not cool. That's probably not good. That person probably feels really bad," right? And so now like and so now you have this safeguard against doing that and you're actually like motivated to reflect against that and change your behaviors and make sure like that like this is happening. And like or for example like even not just your own actions, for example if you're dating someone and your partner is a really bad person and your friend thinks like they're likely to cheat on you, right? They're going to tell you so even though this is the harsh truth. They want to protect you, and this radical honesty uniquely enables them to do that. Second substantive on mental health, and we think that this is like especially important, right? So like mainly take this from my speech. So in society there is a strong narrative that to be professional and to be viewed positively you need to be stoic and you need to be calm, right? That means you can only express your emotions very minimally, which leads to a culture of repression and bottling up your feelings in a very unhealthy way. Now, this is especially prevalent, sorry, with things like, for example, toxic masculinity, where this leads to bad mental health and increased violence in and out of the home, right? Or even suicide rates. All of these things are very pernicious harms that come naturally from not being able to express your emotions to people, right? And this is mainly because people don't have an outlet to express their most pressing emotions and fears, and therapists are very often very inaccessible because we say that one where mental health is like the areas where mental health is kind of the worst, there's like generally a stigma against getting mental health, like getting mental health help, right? So you like won't be able to access that anyway, and also therapists are very often like inexpensive, and it's like very expensive, and it's probably rare to find someone who suits your needs, because that therapist is probably a stranger, they don't know you well. So on our side, uniquely, now you have someone to trust and someone you're comfortable with that you can talk to about these sorts of fears and your deepest darkest secrets or whatever, right? So that person knows you uniquely well and is able to give you the comfort you need or the solutions you need that are tailored especially to you, and that is especially productive for you. And so just in case like op says that this like places a burden, like an asymmetric burden on the other side, we say this is not true, again, because from our framing we said it's likely to be like reciprocal. So if I share with you, you're probably going to share with me, and this is going to happen, like benefit both sides of the relationship, right? Okay. And so what is the impact for this? We think that first of all, you can set better boundaries with people, because now you have better knowledge on both sides of what people are comfortable with. Without radical honesty, right, uniquely, you are probably not going to feel comfortable. Even if you're close with that person, you don't want to like lie to them or make them feel bad, and so you're probably going to lie to them and say like certain things are okay just because you don't want to hurt them, even though they aren't. So with radical honesty, like both sides know what is good for each other, and so you can set better boundaries and have healthier relationships. And also second, you are no longer as repressed, because like the act of simply talking about what's bothering you already makes you feel better. Like it's pretty proven that just being able to share your emotions like very much benefits your mental health. And third and finally, the other person is uniquely able to make you feel better because of that deep bond you have. They know you the best, probably, and like know the context and the situations you're in, so they are able to help you and comfort you and make you happier when you're like going through that kind of thing. And finally, just a small point of preemptive, just in case Off says that you're going to say very hurtful things because you're going to like and use radical honesty as a sort of like excuse, right? Like for example, like telling your elderly mother you have cancer, or like maybe insulting them. First of all, we think if it's insulting them, there's already like from our framing, we've already mitigated this, right? But second, if it's like a piece of news, for example, that's very likely to be helpful. There are ways not to tell a lie and still be like honest and like be kind in the way you say things, right? We think if you don't do that, you're just kind of a bad person. And and so even if it is hurtful, sometimes we say that like on net, it's you have to face the truth, and it's better to do that with someone you love and trust, and it's better to know those bad things sooner rather than later when that thing is done. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Time starts. Now, given the info slide, I feel like today's debate is pretty narrow because basically the radical honesty doesn't mean like you're only sharing, like, for example, partial of your information, right? Based on the info slide, it basically says that you are actually sharing every single things, right? For example, not holding any of those harsh truths or opening like everything about your feelings, right? So in this case, we found that those radical, especially those radical honesty will be extremely harmful, especially in case of worsened relationship and also on privacies, right? So I begin my argument. So when I first begin with a few pieces of clarification and setup, right? Firstly, radical honesties, right? It doesn't always mean that you're only talking about to your only relationships, such as your friends, your family, right? We thought that this relationship can be opened up to many different people, right? For example, maybe your teachers, and you also have like sort of relationship with them, and also for example with your classmates, teammates, and so on. You always have like some sort of relationship with everyone, right? To without that judge, this actually means that having radical honesties means not holding down any sort of relationship or like perspective ideas to others, right? I mean that sometimes you might actually be able, for example, talking about harsh truths to others that may not actually benefit to you, and not be able to talk about white lies, especially when those supporting means that, and majority of the time, especially in society, people believe that this is actually a good thing that people should do, right? Because absolutely that if your friends feel like you're not sharing those for example radical honesty to you, they might feel like there's no fidelity of you, and they might actually feel like you're actually betraying them, which is extremely crucial and extremely basically negatively impacting your whole relationship. So yeah, first few pieces of responses, right? So when our opponents say that how radical honesty will actually improve yourself, because as once you actually give your ideas and basically share information, your friend will be likely to stop you, and your friend will be likely to, for example, give you some recommendation for you to, for example, improve yourself. Third, we think that this might not always be the case, because telling you your ideas doesn't necessarily mean that others will tell you back, right? We thought that even if they're, for example, let's say it is double-sided, which our opponent characterizes it, right? But it doesn't mean that you actually follow their advices, and even if they're your friends, right? You're actually, even if you're actually sharing your ideas, it's unlikely for you to follow them, and it's also unlikely for you to, for example, understand them and support them anyways, right? For example, giving an example of the dating, which our point to give an example of, you might say that, let's say that your friends disagree with you with, like, for example, your boyfriend, right? This might actually be not really beneficial for your friends, because that you might actually feel like your friend are even if your friends have the perspective, it is unlikely for you to follow, especially when you feel like a sense of romance, which is extremely unlikely for your friends to actually support you anyways.
Point.
Yeah.
Okay, when there is that unique amount of trust that we get with radical honesty, why is it that you're less likely to trust your friend, but rather a person that you've just met like 20 minutes ago and you think they're really hot or something?
Wait. Trusting your friends doesn't mean you're always supporting them, right? So it's how there always be some sort of disagreement between you and your friends, right? That's extremely likely, especially when you have different perspectives. Sharing your ideas doesn't mean that other people will understand it or directly support it anyways, right? So yeah, moving on to our first argument, which is about white lies, right? Sometimes we tell that relationship is always based on some sort of lies, especially when, for example, if you feel like, let's say that we tell you that this is essentially true when you want to prevent, for example, future negatively feelings of your others, and especially from the relationship, which is some sort of privacy is extremely needed, right? This is actually true when white lies actually help you some sort of avoid different sort of conflicts with your friends, right? For example, let's say your friends have like extremely ugly shoes. And instead of just, for example, because you are having a radical honesty, you feel like you have the obligation to tell them, right? You might say that, oh, I feel like your suit is extremely bad. But when your friends actually feel like, for example, they really like their suits, or like in some sort of areas, they really, for example, enjoy their wearings and outfits, they may actually feel like you're only just pointing out some unnecessary details and feel like you're insulting their, for example, perspectives, right? So tell the truth, even if there are actually some sort of, for example, trust based on those boundaries, because it is actually unlikely for them to, for example, truly understand each other's, even in those kind of circumstances. Well, the second argument here is how there will be always some sort of words in relationship, right? Because if they found that you're not sharing some sort of information that you really did not want to share with them, they feel a sense of betrayal, and they also feel like there's no fidelity on you, right? For example, let's say that you and your friends, let's say you and your friends, for example, you have a secret of your friends, right? And you do not want to tell your friends, and then if your friends find it out, they might feel like, oh, I'm always being honest with you, and I always give you every single ideas I have, but you're not actually giving me those ideas, right? They will actually feel a sense of betrayal and basically having a worsened relationship between you and your friends, right? And the problem here is about balance, right? For example, Confucius has basically said, right, there must be a middle point in everything, and balance is extremely needed in every single thing, right? We're told that pushing too much information and pushing too much burdens and information on your friends will actually give you a worsened relationship, right? For example, let's say you're all having a really tiring day of working, right? And you just give you all your negative feelings and, for example, bad perspectives of your boss to your friends, right? Your friends Firstly, your friends might also be extremely tired, and they may not have the time or have the energy to keep responding to you and sharing their ideas, right? You're basically pushing each other's on a tipping point, and the boundary is that you must share every single ideas you have, otherwise you are not being a good friend, or otherwise you are not trusting each other's, right? This is extremely a fatal relationship, as once you actually, for example, do not want to share specific information, such as your privacies, right? Because of those privacy, everyone have a secrets, right? And these secrets might not always be relevant to your relationship. But having those radical honesty basically push those privacy into a must for your friends, right? Otherwise, I feel like if I'm being honest to you, you also should be honest to me, right? So, such as, for example, how majority of the privacies may be inappropriate to others, right? Such as, for example, personal identification, sexual preferences, specific needs, and perspective to others, right? All of these, for example, all of these might be extremely individualized, right? But if you're actually sharing those information to your friends, it might not actually be appropriate, and basically both of you feel like you should be extremely, extremely close, and you should always share everything ideas once you have those radical honesty anyways. And then yeah, also moving on to we tell them why current relationship is already good enough, right? We give you a balance that we actually give them, we basically give those information that people want, right? That how it is basically enough for people to actually maintain the relationship, and how it is basically enough for people to share their own ideas, right? So we thought that we actually maintain our relationship in a much better ways, that we actually give them, for example, appropriate information, and not always sharing those privacy details that you might not always always want, right? So actually give you a really clear boundaries between you and your friends, and which is extremely crucial for an extremely future and long-term relationship. And it's really we tell that the space between you and your friends is really important. That's all. Thank you so much.
Society tells us that honesty is the best policy, yet teaches us from childhood that politeness is the highest virtue. So we are caught in a paradox. We want deep connection, but we are afraid of the radical honesty and obstacles required to get there. But here's the thing, peace built on a lie isn't real peace. It's just a delay. We think white lies protect our friends, as first speaker mentioned, but really they just build a wall between us. Now, let me clarify our scope. So, we are not suggesting that radical honesty is a universal social norm for every single interaction. As such, that you do not need to tell the cashier you hate their haircut. And radical honesty is a tool specifically for close relationships, like familial or romantic. Why? Because these are the relationships built on high trust. These are the spaces where you are safe and safe enough to be vulnerable. Now, before I move into my arguments, let me address the concerns coming from the op bench. So, on the first rebuttal, opposition is basically saying that if honesty causes a bad reaction, then honesty is the problem. But that mixes up two things. One, honesty equals giving real information. And two, reaction equals to how someone handles the real information. So, people won't always respond perfectly, sure. But avoiding truth just because the reaction might be messy creates a relationship where everyone is guessing. Also, if someone reacts badly to calm honesty, that's not proof honesty is wrong. It's proof that you learned something important about how safe communication is in that relationship. And even if you don't fully understand each other instantly, radical honesty still helps because it starts the real conversation earlier instead of letting misunderstandings grow for months. Now, onto the second rebuttal. They argue that trusting your friends doesn't mean supporting them, and disagreement happens. And we agree with that, but it actually supports proposition. It supports our side because radical honesty doesn't mean I blindly hype you up no matter what. It means that I can disagree with you without faking it. And two, I can tell you the truth without acting like the truth is an attack in itself. And a strong friendship isn't one where you never disagree. It's one where you can disagree and still respect each other. Opposition admitting that disagreement happens proves that conflict is normal. So the question becomes, do we handle it openly or do we hide it with some fake support? Now, onto my substantives. My first argument is about the depth of bond between the two people. So the premise is that a true bond can only exist between two known entities. If you are filtering your thoughts, feelings, or history, your partner is not bonding with you. They're bonding with the character you have created. Radical honesty is the only way to ensure that the relationship is real rather than performative. So, first of all, in standard relationships, there's always a gap between who you are in your head and who you present to your partner. We edit out the ugly parts, such as the insecurities, or the weird habits, or the fleeting judgments. And this gap creates subtle but permanent distance. Second of all, closing the gap. Radical honesty closes this gap. When you share the ugly truths, such as I felt jealous when you said that, or I am bored right now, you are inviting your partner into your actual internal reality, not just the outside you built for strangers. Third of all, you cannot feel truly loved if you suspect the love is conditional on you maintaining a facade. When you are radically honest and are still accepted, you achieve a level of security that polite relationships can never ever offer. The impact of this is that it creates a relationship of absolute psychological safety, as you no longer have to perform for your partner. Yes, I'll take that POI.
Basically, once you're having rejected by opening, for example, your radical honesty for multiple times, or being, for example, not being respected after you share your internal self, won't you actually be afraid to furthermore share your own internal self and basically having like basically feeling more like an outsiders?
First of all, if you're afraid of sharing your real self with your partner, that just shows that your relationship is wrong. And you shouldn't even be in this relationship in the first place because relationship is built on trust, and you should be able to trust that. Now, moving on to my second argument. We must attack the root cause of why people lie. Because psychologically, humans are cognitive misers. Because we seek the path for least resistance. We often lie not to protect others, but to protect our own comfort and avoid the emotional hardness or labor of like explaining ourselves. So first of all, saying I'm fine is easy, but explaining that I am feeling insecure because you looked at your phone while I was talking and it makes me feel undervalued requires energy, vulnerability, and the risk of a conflict. And we lie because we are tired. And second of all, when we allow white lies to be the standard structure of a relationship, as Op wants to do so, our ability to articulate complex emotions are hard. So like we lose the vocabulary of our own needs because we never use it, and we let resentment build up in the background because it is easier than confronting it in the foreground. And now, moving on to honesty as a discipline. Radical honesty forces us to overcome the psychological laziness. It forces the brain to engage with the partner rather than bypass them. It turns communication into a daily practice. Oh, sorry. And like It turns communication into a daily practice, and we let resentment build up in the background because it's easier than confronting it in the foreground. And third of all, radical honesty forces us to overcome the psychological laziness. It forces the brain to engage with the partner rather than bypass them. It turns communication into like a daily practice and something you do on a daily basis rather than a rare event. And the impact of this is that it prevents the worst outcome, because most relationships don't end because of one big lie. They end because of thousands of unsaid truths and small avoidances that pile up over time. And this structure prevents that pile up. So moving on, let's take a step back and look at how a relationship actually fails in both worlds to a certain extent. So take a specific common scenario: a partner who has become complacent, lazy, or selfish over time. In the opposition's world, you value keeping the peace. You don't want to hurt their feelings, so you swallow your annoyance and you tell yourself it's not a big deal. The immediate result is that you have a quiet evening. There's no fight, it feels safe. The long-term consequences of white lies is that you start to withdraw emotionally, and your partner has no idea that you are pulling away because you never told them the truth to begin with. And eventually the relationship ends, or you stay together in misery. In our world, you value the truth. You sit them down and you say the harsh thing. You say, I feel like you are taking me for granted and I am losing attraction to you because of your lack of an ambition, or something like that. The immediate result is that it hurts. They might cry. They might get defensive. It is terrible and it is uncomfortable. Now, the long-term consequence is that this is actually so-called painful growth, because the problem is now a physical thing in the room that you can tackle together and you can address it in real time. And the partner now has the agency to change, and they know exactly what is at stake. So at the end of the day, the opposition is offering you a very pretty picture. It is a picture of like dinner parties where no one argues, of marriages where no one admits they're unhappy, or of families where everyone smiles while dying inside. And it is a picture of peace, but it is the peace of nothing. It is a piece of like a graveyard. We on proposition do not want peace at the cost of reality. We are asking for a world where our relationships are strong enough to handle the truth. We are asking for the chance to be better people through the feedback of those we love. And we are asking for the deep, terrifying, beautiful comfort of being fully known. Hence why this motion must and will stand. So proud to propose.
Now, before we begin, we'd like to give two clarifications, right? First, we talk about the info site, and the topics does not specifically say relationships is very trust and very close relationship. It just says relationships. For example, familial, romantic, or platonic. So thus, we don't think on their side they have to must identify this as one person who you are very close, or who is your best friend or best relation. Second, we told you that when defined as a close relative, radical honesty means sharing everything. As in the info site, it does say sharing everything. Thus, we think the main idea we should be arguing about is not whether the certain harsh truth, like comments, are bad or not. It's about whether sharing everything in your life to someone else is bad or not. Moving on to rebuttals to their main contention. Right? I think the first contention given by PM is that there will be self-improvement when we share our feelings about the others, and we can improve ourselves and others. We have two responses. First, we deny. Self-improvement won't happen anyways, because human nature is that we listen to what we believe as ourselves above all. Even if your friend tells you something, this is very likely that you don't listen to it because you have different perspectives. Something you like might not be liked by your friend. So thus we don't think it's very likely for you to actually listen to the compliments given by your friends. Instead of listening and changing, this actually breaks your relationship because you think your friend doesn't understand what you're saying. You think your friend's perspective is disagreeing with your perspective, thus it breaks your relationship. Instead of actually doing the basis of what our opponents want to do by self-improvement. Secondly, reverse. We think self-improvement the opposite will actually happen. There will be worse self-improvement because from different perspectives, different information will be given. Like for example, like if I want to watch a certain animation, my friend may not like to. So they could maybe give some comments on this, which we would disagree on, right? So if this happens when you're giving all of these comments on, this will actually worsen the relationship, break a relationship instead of the so-called self-improvement. Like, for example, if my friend doesn't like my hobby, doesn't mean that I should just give up this hobby, right? Even if they think this hobby is bad, it's still my self-interest. So thus keeping this to themselves will help maintain our relationship instead of breaking it up as what is happening on prop side. Moving on to third, we told you we minimize. We think showing feelings or ideas doesn't necessarily need radical honesty, as defined as sharing everything. Even if I think, for example, my friend's dress today is not quite pretty, or in my style, I could just tell them. I don't need to share as a radical honesty to share every single thing. By radical honesty, we still mean private settings. Or sorry, did you say POI?
Yes.
Sure. Okay, obviously we won't listen to these people, our friends, unconditionally, right? We're just saying that we're more likely to listen and actually think about it, as opposed to if a stranger just randomly calls us out on something random, or no one actually calls you out at all.
How is that related to what I just said? Even so, like if you if you're more likely to listen to what your friend says, it still doesn't mean that you need radical honesty. As the topic specifically says, you share every single thing. You share everything. We don't think there's a necessary need of everything because then it's just like then you're just sharing every single thing you believe, which definitely contradicts by some way. So that's even if you would like so that's why we talk about we minimize because we think sharing feelings or ideas will happen anyways, even if you don't have a radical honesty. If your friend has a certain comment on something you do, they can just say it directly, even if you like even if you don't have this so-called radical honesty by sharing everything, right? Moving on to their second argument given by PM, it's on how they benefit mental health, right? Two responses. First, we deny. We think sharing feelings on everything actually brings a backlash because there'll be too much burden put onto your friend or your partner, right? Even if our opponents say that, oh, there will be no burden because both sides are sharing, we think this doesn't solve the root cause of burden. When you talk too much to your partner, talk too much to your friend about your daily burdens, your daily emotions, this causes extra burden on them. Sometimes your partner, your friend are just tired and they just want to watch TV or sleep, something you have to weigh. You can't just like put all of your feelings, all of your emotions onto someone else who doesn't know your life and who also is tired. If you just talk directly and like if both people talk and both people give burdens to others, we think this worsens the relationship instead of actually lifting the burden, right? Second, we minimize. We think sharing feelings don't need like again, we don't think sharing feelings needs such a radical honesty. I can still share my feelings with my friend, even though I keep certain information I think will give them too much burden away from them. Even if I keep certain amounts of information that I think is too much for them to listen to, I can still share certain amounts of my feelings with them, which keeps our relation, maintains our relation, but doesn't hurt our relationship. Thus, we don't think there's such a necessariness of promoting what pro says, because proponents of radical honesty means that you absolutely give every single thing to your friend or your relationship. So thus, we think it's completely unnecessary. Furthermore, our opponents talk about let's address what they said in their DPM, right? So the DPM tells me that honesty is real information, so we're just creating barriers without honesty. Radical honesty is not the same to just pure honesty. We agree that honesty is needed during relationships, but that doesn't mean we have to share every single thing. That doesn't mean we have to have honesty, like radical honesty, meaning that you give every single truth, every single thing that you feel in your life to other people. We think this, by this harsh truth, it's not more of a comment that you give to people. It's more of like, for example, I'm keeping away certain things that might make my friend worry for me. It's more of these truths instead of the truths that like our opponents are talking about, whether like you're giving comments that people don't like, right? So we think by this, we're just lifting burden off more people because they have their own life, they have burden in their own life, they have problems they have to solve in their own life. Giving them, sharing them sometimes your burdens just makes them feel even more burden, makes them feel even more stressed because now they have to think about their own life. They also have to think about your life, which gives them extra burden that you don't want to put on your partner or your friend, right? So thus we think on our side, even if we give certain amounts of honesty, like our opponents are trying to say that honesty is good, we think there's no necessariness of giving them this radical honesty to sharing everything. Furthermore, the second thing DPM tells me is that there will only be a true bond and there will be a gap if you edit out ugly parts of yourself. Editing out ugly parts of ourselves often happen even to your family. You cannot say that I will just put all my real self in front of everyone because sometimes people do this for some specific reasons. Giving radical honesty doesn't just harm this. They cause extremely harmful and is against one's will. Sometimes individuals just want to keep their own feelings to themselves. Doesn't necessarily mean like because I want to be honest to you, because we want to maintain a good relationship, I'm gonna tell every single thing to you. That's just not radical, right? Furthermore, the last thing they tell me is that the consequences of wise lies draw away because there will, even if there's immediate harm, there will be a painful growth. We think painful growth is not what builds on the relationship, instead it's what worsens relationships. So thus we don't think on our side we definitely need this radical honesty that worsens relationship to maintain the so-called no gap relationship that our opponents are trying to raise. And thus never so proud to oppose. Thank you.
2, 1. We think that Op has a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between radical honesty and regular honesty. Regular honesty is what people do when it's easy. Radical honesty is what people do when it's hard, right? We recognize that right now there is a huge social stigma in society. It's hard to share your true feelings because of toxic masculinity, because a lot of times people expect you to be able to take on this yourself as an adult. We think that sometimes people are afraid to speak up to their friends, right? You don't want to not insult, you don't want to point out that something bad your friends did. You won't want to point out something that they did that was wrong because you're afraid that it will harm your relationships. And the same thing happens in all of your relationships. So we think that the power of radical honesty is to accept that relationships are not perfect. We think that it's valuable that relationships are not perfect, that you have differences, that you have disagreement, because it is what actually leads to a supportive and long-lasting relationship. So in my speech, I'll do two things. One, focus on our clashes and explain why we end our debate. And the two clashes I'm going to talk about is one, which side is able to form better relationship bonds, and second of all, which side is better for the self, so in terms of mental health and self-improvement. So first of all, we think that there is a mischaracterization when it comes to relationship bonds, right? Right, radical honesty isn't always about telling something really terrible, right? We see that the op speakers keep focusing on, oh, if you insult your friend, oh, if you say something really bad about yourself. We don't think so, right? You can also be honest about your positive feelings about others. We think that if your friend is doing something bad, you can tell them, but we don't actually have to tell them in a very insulting way, right? That's just not being a good friend. We recognize that we can tell them in a very supportive way, and these are things that actually develop relationships because we enable them to be better persons, right? For example, I don't like your clothing choice. That's fine, right? We can still be friends, but I want you to improve. And the difference between our side and their side is that on their side, there's probably not going to be anyone that speaks up at all. On our side, even if, let's take them at their best, the person doesn't accept your criticism, right? I'm just going to wear what I continue to wear, right? At least they're going to think about it. At least they're going to consider. We think that on our side, there's actually a much bigger chance because a lot of times the people you practice radical honesty with is going to be the people closest to you, and they're going to take your opinions very seriously. But at the same time, one thing that they don't have is that we can always be honest about something very positive, right? We can always be honest about something that we like about you today. For example, today your dress looks great, right? For example, you just made a great speech in your debate competition. We think these are the small elements in radical honesty that add up to create a very, very long-lasting relationships, right? And they keep framing that disagreement as something that is really, really bad, right? If you disagree with somebody, if you have this argument, we think that's part of being a friend. That's part of every single relationship, right? Even if you marry someone, even if you're in love with someone, with your boyfriend or girlfriend, right? You're not always going to be agreeing with every single thing. There's always going to be small disagreements. And under the social stigma that we have proven on our side that they still haven't responded to, when we have this piece of framing, we recognize that in the status quo, it's very hard for people to speak up. So the power of radical honesty on our side is we actually allow them to address these things openly, right? Because in a relationship with these small disagreements, they might be small at first, they build up, and you never talk about it. This is what leads to relationships breaking down, right? Have a divorce, it's probably not going to be one single thing. It's going to be all of these small bits of problems that you weren't able to address because you didn't want to harm the other person's feeling in that instant, right? The power of radical honesty is we recognize the issue immediately. We address it as soon as it appears. This way, in the long term, we think that this won't affect their mental health or affect the positiveness of your relationship with everyone. And lastly, we think that there's also a misunderstanding about what sharing everything means. Obviously, like when someone asks you, for example, if you're, for example, they ask you about your sexual orientation, on radical honesty, maybe you're not comfortable about it, but you will still talk about it. But that doesn't mean you'll just walk up to every single person you know and tell them, oh, I'm gay. Oh, I'm gay. That's not what happens, right? You only say it when other people ask you to. And we think that even if sometimes this gets negative responses, even if sometimes maybe your parents aren't comfortable about this being, we think that there are two outcomes to this. One, which people that are actually truly supportive of you, truly love you, for example, your parents, your very close friends, maybe your intimate partner, we think that this is actually a way for them to actually understand the intimate trauma that you're actually going through, right? How difficult it is being part of a racial minority, or how difficult it is like going on with your life. We think that this actually enables them to better understand your position, something that they won't be able to do in the status quo and the op side. And second of all, if these people are truly unsupportive, for example, if just a person you met on the street, or maybe like a friend you only know for 6 months, and they refuse to be supportive of you, we think that's completely fine, right? Because we want people to build positive relationships. We want them to spend their time on people who actually care about them. So the power of this is that we can cut out of these people of your life, right? If they're not supportive, if they're not willing to accept you for who you are, we think it's completely fine that you stop being friends with them, because then you can focus your time on actually better relationships. So we see on the status quo, like they have no way to address these very small problems that are going to eventually build up. So on our side, with radical honesty, we can actually build powerful, long-lasting relationships. Moving on to our second clash about mental health and self-improvement. First of all, self-improvement. Yeah, actually, I'll take that POI.
How those long-lasting friends are extremely minority, and it's extremely hard to find. Like basically, you're always trying to find it, but it will be extremely unlikely for you to truly
Yeah, that's why
achieve.
you have to keep trying to find it, right? Obviously, you want to do this, and this is the way you find it, right? If you don't practice radical honesty, if these people continue to hold a grudge against you, but you won't know, that's the problem. In the long term, it's going to break down. And on our side, we actually have a mechanism that allows you to form these relationships. I think you're just contradicting yourself here. First of all, on mental health, we think that the only actually valid point they have to address this is, the burden shifts to others. Well, first of all, our first speaker has already said that, obviously there's going to be radical honesty between you and this intimate partner, right? If you're being honest with your significant other, they're probably also going to be honest with you. And second of all, we talk to many people. So this burden is probably not just going to be shared with one singular person. You can discuss this issue with a lot of types of different people, right? You can talk about it with your dad, your mom, your very close friends, maybe your girlfriend or boyfriend, right? There's a lot of people you can talk to, and this burden is going to be shared. And at least on our side, we have a mechanism for them to actually speak up, right? We see that in the current status quo, there's things like toxic masculinity. You're expected to deal with this as an adult because you had to be strong, you had to be independent. And this is the thing preventing a lot of people from speaking up. When you have radical honesty, you're going to have to speak this. Going to have to speak your feelings. So at least we think that there's going to be some form of support. And considering that our first speaker has already justified why, a lot of mental health support systems are not very accessible. We think that this is one of the best ways you can deal with your mental health and share your burdens immediately in the short term. And lastly, on self-improvement, they said that listening to yourself is human nature, but I've already addressed this in my previous class, actually. If the person you're talking to, if the person that's honest with you is someone that you trust, you're probably going to at least consider them, even if you don't. So at least on our side, we have a way where people can speak up. So on overall, I think that we win on all two clashes about mental health, well-being, and forming better relationships. Thank you. I'm so proud to propose.
I think the government.
One. Now, firstly, our side believes that our opponent are actually being very untruthful in this debate, right? Our opponent's only case scenario is to say that very likely that they will only share those things for those people that actually trust each other, right? Whereas those people that you're in a relationship. Few clarifications. Firstly, our side believes that it's very likely that relationships can be contradictory. It's very likely that you want to be together with that person, and very likely that if you don't say about this secret, nothing will change. However, it's very likely that if you speak about this secret that isn't even affecting you now, it's just going to cause huge results, right? Our side don't see why you actually need to say that in the status quo as a test to test whether they trust you for 100% or not. I want to try to claim that it's very likely that for the majority of those cases, they can actually spend time on those people who actually cares about them. However, it's very likely that in the status quo, even if you're actively trying to find out, it's only the extreme minority of those people that actually find those partners, right? For the majority, those friends that are contradictory to you, like want to step your dark secrets, is the only one that you can find. Therefore, our side don't see why you need to tear away a perfectly good relationship when you can, for example, just hide those things and nothing will change, right? Our opponent could claim that it's very likely that this can lead to much harder relationships. Our side believes that it's very likely that I think, for example, the secrets isn't like that, right? For example, it might be a thing that won't affect your friendship if you don't talk about it. For example, your feelings about something, right? Obviously, I don't see why it's very likely that you'll need to be forced to speak about it, as it's just going to harm your relationship later on. Okay, so what's your POI?
Okay, if we don't actually find these close friends, we're talking about how radical honesty is how we actually build those very close relationships and how we're able to develop them. On our side, where do you get them at all? You just can't find them anywhere, right? On our side, at least you can construct productively towards that.
Firstly, I also believe that it's just the extreme minority of those cases, right? For the majority of those cases, like for 90% or so, people is not going to agree with them, or their friends is very likely that they won't going to accept it, right? Therefore, for the majority, they are going to lose the only friends and the only close people that they have. I don't see why for you only benefiting the minority is enough to overweigh our side of this house, right? So now, like moving to some other. I believe that you're just given a POI, right? So now we on to some other clarifications. So firstly, our side believes that we have already told you that for a lot of those things, or those secrets, if you don't talk about them anymore, it's not going to, for example, to affect your relationship. However, on your side of the house, when you're just going to bring that up, it's just going to have a much worse relationship in the long run, right? And make you have much less possibility to actually get a relationship. And secondly, our side, opponents are trying to tell you that radical honesty is what they do. Is hard to afraid to speak of their friends, and very likely that they can be positive in the can be honest in the positive way and speak it in the upbeat way, right? Ours, I don't see why this is actually going to affect your relationship. As ours, I believe that it's very likely that human nature is to hate people tell you about what something is wrong. Even if it's in an upbeat way, for the majority of those people, they're still going to feel like, for example, this guy is insulting me, or they're pointing that I'm wrong, right? Even if you say it in an upbeat way, ours, I believe that this is just going to cause much more disagreements in your relationship and so on, right? And secondly, our opponent claimed to you that radical honesty speaks about positive things. However, ours, I don't see why in normal honesty you won't talk about those positive things, right? Because I believe that our opponent is actually being uncharitable in this debate for those few reasons. That's claimed that it's very likely that everyone can actively find a relationship that is very good for you if you want to. However, for the majority, that is not going to happen. Now we on to those clash points. Firstly is the clash points on relationships. Our opponent tried to claim to you that it very likely that those white lives are just going to have much more disagreements and etc. Right? And we should actually find those people that actually cares about them. However, our side gives you two responses. Firstly, our side believes that it is like extremely likely in the status quo, and very likely that the white light is the best way for you to protect someone, right? For example, if you actually say those white lies and you say that I got cancer, I'm just going to die later on, it's very likely that your relationship with that people is just going to be much more awkward in the status quo. It's only with white lies that is much better than you to, for example, admit to them that I'm going to die or I have cheated on you, right? I don't see why this is actually good for your relationship in the status quo, even if you spit it out and people is going to accept that. It's just going to cause, for example,
Sorry, point.
a mistakable impact on the relationship, right? Secondly, our side believes that it's very likely that for those normal disagreements and those small issues, it probably won't cause any impact, even if you don't point it at that out, right? For example, if your friend's closet is like very ugly, even if you don't point that out, would it cause any, for example, impact on your relationship? No, right? It's just by pointing it out, you actually makes those people to have much more disagreements with you. Secondly, also, I believe that it's very likely that you will have much more burdens for that people by staying it out, as mentioned by our second speaker. And thirdly, also, I believe that for those white lies, it's better for you not to talk about that. So because I believe that our side should win on the relationship, because we have proven to you that just generally talking about those things is just going to cause much more disagreements and making you lose the only friends you've got. Our opponent may claim that for the minority of the people, they can find those good relationships, sure, but what for the majority, our opponent never actually clarified this. Secondly, for mental health, our opponent claimed that bottling up for the feelings is bad. However, ours believes that if it spits it out, you're very likely that your backlash is just going to be much worse, right? For example, that if you had spoken out about the bad secrets that you have, you're just going to have much huger consequences. For example, when all of your friends go away and you can't trust anyone, and you feel like once you're speaking this out is right or not, does you think that this is just going to have much larger mental issues than you? Secondly, our side believes that it's very likely that for those small issues, not spitting it out, it doesn't matter. If a friend's clothes look ugly to you, if you don't spit it out, it isn't going to cause, for example, any impact on your mental relationship, right? It's only for those big secrets that it will cause any mental damage to you if you actually keep them in your heart. But if you spit it out, just gonna have much more backlashes. In a very unlikely scenario, if you speak it out, those people will have that conflict resolved, and your partner, for example, will say that, oh, I accept it. But for the majority of those cases, this won't happen. You're just going to have much more mental health issues by feeling that your secret have been blown out now and your friend just leaves you, right? So because I believe the our session went on mental health, and thank you very much.
Stars. Now, so the opponent gave us a pretty like messy case, right? So they're saying that they want to try to show their radical honesty to others to find good friends, and if they're not a great and long-lasting friends, they'll just give up them and find another long-lasting friend. So, Judge, when we think about this today's debate, the only differences between government side and the opposition side is how we begin our friendship, right? Because I think long-lasting friends exist on both sides of the house, anyways, right? So we tell the judge, basically our opponent basically are trying to open their friendship by sharing their own truly and identity, right? By basically showing their internal self to others. And basically we're probably opening with like a white light and probably more like in more appearance, right? Then the only difference here is that Josh, that how our opponent are actually be able to have less likely to have more friends. So the only friends will probably look like long-lasting friends, and other friends will which have, for example, different divergence or have, for example, different perspective with them, will likely have conflict with them and less likely to be friends anyways, right? So their only friends will probably look like long-lasting friends because they are only using the radical honesties and they are only finding a friend that can accept their true internal identities, which is only minority possibilities and the majority time, right? So the probability the case basically based on every friend will have the relationship with them, right? And they actually can be, and they basically assume that every friend could be trusted about every friend, and you're actually giving them radical honesties. Others will give you true radical honesty too. George, we talk about in our modern society, lies will actually exist in every side, right? Especially when those radical honesty only happens in your side, it might actually be unlikely for them to also giving you the radical honesties, which is only telling you the only truth, basically telling, also sharing their own internal thoughts, right? It will be likely for them not sharing their own identities and not only basically trying to give you acceptance, but not always giving you their true identities, right? It actually looks like how you are actually trying to find long-lasting friends. However, they actually may not always accept you, but you're still sharing those information with them to truly find good friends. And if they do not accept you, you'll find more long-lasting friends, right? And during the process is judged. The main problem here is that how you actually be likely to feel a sense of despair, especially when you try multiple times for finding long-lasting friends. And the majority of people do not, for example, accept you. You will feel a sense of despair that everyone will not be able to trust it, and you will never find any people who are actually wanting to accept you anyways. Then, Judge, why do in our side we solve the problem? We solve the problem because we're actually, for example, giving you was opening with your like a normal relationship, right? We tell that your long-lasting friends will still exist in our side, even if without telling others your true radical honesty. In the really beginning of the time, you are still able to, for example, find similar hobbies, right? And when you actually open your conversations, even if we did not begin our radical honesties, we tell that sharing your, for example, your perspective, your thoughts are still existing on our side, right? So therefore, Judge, we see that we tell that we actually are able to, for example, find long-lasting friends, but at the same time, able to, for example, also find friends, even if you do not share similar internal self, you're still able to find some sort of friendship anyways. So, Trevor, we thought that the only impact difference here is how we are actually giving you the huge impact about giving you that we actually find more friends and also long-lasting friends exist on both sides. And we tell that for the mental health problem, right? We tell that it will be less likely for people, for example, even if you're not giving them information or giving them the perspectives, and it's unlikely for them to accept your perspectives, right? And with some divergence, long-lasting friend might accept it, but without long-lasting friend, they will not accept it anyways, right? So you actually break your friendship because of this. And basically, we tell that if you not find those long-lasting friends, you'll fall into deeper mental health problems because you feel like none of people will truly understand you and none of people will truly accept you, even if you told them your ideas, even if you're actually giving them your ideas. So for all these above, we have to prove to you that how radical honesties will not be beneficial and overall like basically friendship. And we thought that we find long-lasting friends too, but they actually will have less likely to find overall more friends than us. That's all. Thank you so much for listening.
one. I just like to note that Ob's case just really starts to shrink by the time they get to second and third. They go from you will dump everything to people who won't accept you and will hate you for everything to you just can't find good friends, right? And they tell you, like, I'm going to quote reply speech here. You find more friends and more long-lasting friends. We tell you that we actually like just mitigate this completely. And the fact that they haven't dealt with the majority of our impacts and the majority of like the things that are the most pernicious in this debate is what dooms them. All right. So now I have two questions I want to talk about. The first is the bettering of relationships, and the second is the bettering of mental health. Actually, no, I'm going to talk about mental health first because this is really key. Ob talks about mental health literally just in reply and nowhere else. And we think that this is a little bit too late in the debate. They should have like talked about it sooner. But also, like, even if they have talked about it before, like, this is not true, right? You will like with if you have those kind of close relationships, right, you are going to trust each other and you are going to able to release those emotions. We tell you that the gateway to having better mental health is to be able to express it. If you have no one to express it to, right, in the first place, even if you have no one, even if that person doesn't understand, note, right, simply the act of saying it outwards, which is something that you uniquely get on our side, is going to make you feel substantially better, right? And so the only outlet actually on the upside is that you will get like a therapist or something like that, which we have told you is just really inaccessible. And we tell you that the best way, like the most proximate way to be able to get those comforts of mental health is to be able to talk about this to a close friend or your parent or your partner or whatever. And I want to note here that the key impact here is never dealt with, right? We told you from first that the impact is suicide. It's some domestic violence. It's super unhealthy practices that are caused directly by suppressing your emotions and not being able to share them. So this is like the thing that matters most in the debate, because people get physically hurt, people die, and you cannot get the prerequisites of having a good relationship if you are, being beaten up by your spouse. So I really don't see like it's just very marginal on this side. All right. The second thing on the bettering of yourself, we think what is undealt with on offside is that we actually give people the opportunity to speak up about these issues immediately and solve the problem immediately and prevent the accumulation of issues, right? This isn't like a really big bad thing, but rather we're saying that there's a daily practice of saying the small things you have a problem with, which is less likely to hurt a person, right? And what happens, and they try to say, like, in turn, that mental health backlash is actually worse because your friend is more likely to go away if you say something especially bad. First, it's a little unclear why, but even so, we aren't putting all our eggs in one basket, right? If that person isn't comfortable with hearing all of your trauma, right, you can tell your other closest friend or you can tell your parent. And this is more likely to happen on our side because honesty, like, about what bothers us in the first place is what makes good boundaries and what makes good relationships. If you keep lying because you don't want to hurt that person, then you aren't able to set those boundaries. And as Kiki said, you create a gap and you are going to split up. Now, second, on the bettering of relationships, right? What they basically say is that you cannot find close friends. What we tell you is the point is that we make close friends possible in the first place. They keep asserting that it's rare, but then they don't deal with our actual mech, which is that in the cases where you have a close friend or like you have just say a friend, right, and you are able to be radically honest with them, they are able to be radically honest with you. That is how that relationship accumulates and how it grows into that kind of unicorn relationship that Op wants to try and get. And so, like, they try to say we have good friends on either side, but it's much more surface level and it's much less beneficial because you can't get especially the benefits of these unicorn relationships that Op wants to assert are really rare, but make impossible to achieve on their side. And I want to make something very, very clear, right? The idea is that good relationships are honest, right? And they simply cannot be fully honest on off, so we have better relationships. For example, on the cancer thing, it's always better to know sooner rather than later, I think. It's tough, so you want more support and more honesty to deal with it instead of figuring it out last minute. Also, if you cheated on me, I'm just going to take third speaker's example. If you cheated on me, I would want to know, not just so that I can break up with you, but also so we can work through what caused you to cheat in the first place. This is what causes the better parts of your relationship. And note that this insulting thing is just not very reasonable, right? Because there are ways to be able to be honest without insulting them. I don't have to say your shoes are ugly. I can say changing your shoes would be a better option for you. This is still being honest, right? And so we think that in that sense, because we better relationships and we crucially make sure that mental health is much more robust on our side, we take this debate. Thank you.